All right, folks, what's happening going on out there in comic book land? Mark Allen, Four Color Commentary. Thanks for tuning in and for watching at all times. Always thankful for those who watch Four Color Commentary. If you may hear a cat fight in the background. All right, the two felines are not getting along. All right, here this fine day to talk about we lost another giant. And I'm not speaking physically, but just from his impact on the. Hey, what's up, Nicholas? His impact on the industry. Talking about Jim Shooter. Lost him a couple of weeks ago now. And it was big. It was big to me. And I think it was chilling. And, I think it is to a lot of fans. Jim Shooter is a unique figure in comic books. And of course, comic books is a field with a lot of unique figures. But Jim Shooter started started out as a comic book writer at the tender age of 14 years of age. And one of the things that sets him apart is, besides the fact that he started writing for DC Comics at 14, was that he was doing it because his family was, just really feeling financial strain at the time. This would have been about 1965 or 66, somewhere in there. I think he first started getting paid by DC. I'm unclear on that, whether it was 65 or 66, but because he was doing freelance work, I think, for them a little bit before he was actually considered on staff. But wrote for Action Comics, wrote for Legion of Superheroes, but he did it to help his family out at just 14 years of age. His father was trying to think of what business his father was in, or what he was a tradesman. And now I can't remember the trade, but I do know that his father's car had stopped working, and that Jim Shooter's first couple of paychecks from DC Comics paid for a new engine in his dad's car. So that's kind of cool that there was that family. Of course, it was, like I said, it was the 60s. There was still that family dynamic. Jim didn't start writing comics or working in comics because he was a childhood fan or anything like that. I mean, he may have been. I honestly don't know that about him. But he started it because he could write, and he liked comics, obviously, and because his family needed the money. And so that was the job he wanted to do, and so that's what he did. But Shooter was he was something. He was unique, I think, again, in the comic book industry. He went on to working for DC Comics, created some. Now, I'm not a Legion of Superheroes fan, not a big fan. I admire the creativity of the group, and of those who created the group, and the years and the decades of history to the property. But I'm not extremely knowledgeable about him. But I do know that he created a lot of members of the Legion of Superheroes. I know he created the Fatal Five, which was to the Legion of Superheroes pretty much what the Frightful Four was to the Fantastic Four. And so, this is, as a kid, he already had a pretty fertile mind for creation and for stories. I'm looking at some stuff from Wikipedia, because I'm not a comics encyclopedia as much as I'd like to be, even as much as I used to be. The onset of age has started to make some things go away in my mind, but Karate Kid, Pharaoh Lad, Princess Projectra. These are some of the characters that he created. He also created the Parasite, the Superman villain, Parasite. He also created with Kurt Swan. He and Kurt Swan initiated the first ever Superman Flash race. Okay, this was all while he was at DC. Early on, his first few years of work. He also actually worked for Marvel for a short time, just a few weeks, in 1969. Now, a lot of people don't think of him coming along until the 70s. But in 1969, he went to work for Marvel as a co-editor or assistant editor. I'm sorry, assistant editor and co-plotter. All right. He was there for like 3 weeks, maybe a month. He was living at the Y, and he just, the financial crunch, he couldn't stay there. He ended up going into advertising for a time. And after he was in advertising for a while, he applied back to DC and Marvel, worked at DC first, but had problems with a couple of editors there. And his time at Marvel is what most people, I think, know him for, and what most people admire about his career. You'll pardon me, I've got about 3 different things to drink here because I have I've been coughing a lot this morning. So anyway, hopefully that will keep it at bay. But talking about his Marvel years, one of the things, a lot of people know that Jim Shooter came under a lot of fire. A lot of people did not like Jim Shooter. Big names did not like Jim Shooter. John Burton wasn't real friendly with Jim Shooter. Neither was, I believe, Marv Wolfman. Even John Romita Sr. Had said 1 or 2 negative things about Jim Shooter. Now, let me comment on that a little bit more, because John Romita Sr. didn't generally say negative things about people. John Romita Sr., from everything, now I don't know him, but just from consuming comics and comics history for over 4 decades, what I've gathered is that John Romita Sr. was one of the nicest guys to ever work in comic books. And his son seems to have pretty much been, fallen from that tree. The apple fell right from that tree, but it didn't fall far. But John Romita Sr., one of the nicest guys. But even he said that, as an editor, Shooter's reach was a bit too far. And, so, but what I understand about Jim Shooter is that one of the things that he did when he came into Marvel was getting really bad about writers and artists missing deadlines. And he was about strict editorial control. He was, there's no doubting that. But when you're talking about missing deadlines, any readers who read comics and enjoyed comics in the 90s and remember the onset of Image Comics, right away, one of the first things I think of when I think of Image Comics, and I read Image Comics, but one of the first things I think of is missed deadlines. I don't know if anybody else can feel that, but missed deadlines. And so when Shooter came in, Marvel was having a lot of problems with creators missing deadlines, and he kind of cleaned that up. He enforced strict deadlines, and people didn't like that. Artists in general, creative people in general, I should say, whether those are artists or writers, creative people in general don't like, and this is just a fact, I've known a lot of creative people over the years, over the course of my life, they don't like confinement. Now, that's just a fact. And keeping people to a deadline is a type of confinement. Now, I've written for, as a student, let me make this very clear. I've written as a student in college for a newspaper, both college and a small town newspaper. I wrote for over a decade for Michael Vance's Suspended Animation, a comics review column, which was at one time, early stages of the internet. We had lots of people online it was also being printed in print media across the nation, and it was being printed on, or it was being shared on different websites, various websites. Some of my stuff is still up on different websites. In fact, you could probably type in or Google Mark Allen comic book reviews or Suspended Animation Mark Allen. You'll still find some stuff out there. But at one time we were, reaching 1 million readers a year. And that was in the early days of the internet. Well, 2000 to 2010. And so I understand deadlines aren't pleasant, but publications and publishing companies have to enforce deadlines. And so it just kind of boggles my mind that that's one of the things that was one of the main gripes of the day with Jim Shooter, was that he was dictatorial on deadlines. Of course, he was accused of being a dictator anyway. But a lot of that happened after Secret Wars, after Marvel Comics, after Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars. All right, but when Shooter came on at Marvel, he succeeded Archie Goodwin to become Marvel's ninth editor-in-chief at the time. And Stan Lee had relocated to Los Angeles to oversee Marvel's animation and television and film projects. And so Shooter was kind of large and in charge. And again, that's not a crack on his side. He was a large man. He was tall, but not fat, not heavy, but tall, imposing. But he was in charge. He was the guy in charge. And, he did kind of rule the bullpen with a tighter style than those who came before him. Now, let's talk about, though, what he did or what he oversaw during his time at Marvel. He oversaw Claremont and Byrne's classic Uncanny X-Men run. He oversaw John Byrne's Fantastic Four work. He oversaw Frank Miller's Daredevil run and Walt Simonson's Thor run and Roger Stern's runs on both Avengers and Amazing Spider-Man. He was integral in those ventures. And I'm not saying creatively. Please don't misunderstand me. I don't give him any creative credit for those works, but there is something to be said for instilling a disciplined work area. A disciplined work area makes for a more secure work area. I think, whether they like it or not, I think it makes for a more pleasant, creative aura or something like that. I think when things run well and on time, I think it just benefits everything. And he was also very encouraging with, for the creators when they would do good, great work. Now, yes, there was some, it's famously, there were some things that he disagreed with Claremont on about X-Men and such as that. But I don't think, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there was a lot of editorial encroachment on that work. But, share with me any stories that you know, because I may not know as much as I think I know. And at least I'll admit that. Okay. But one thing, here's one of the things about Shooter that I will not, I didn't agree with. He was the one he was the editor-in-chief when Dazzler was first published, and Dazzler #1 was the first direct market comic book that Marvel produced. Went only to comic shops. And to me, that was the beginning of a dark time that leads us today to a time when comic readership is lower than ever in general. Okay. Now, lots could be said about this. Lots could be said about television and video games and internet. All of these would still probably have taken a bite out of comics, especially video games. But I can't help but think that if comic books had never been removed completely from the stands in grocery stores, drugstores, department stores, I can't help but think that there'd be a larger and a broader reader base even today. Now, it would still be hit by video games and television and movies and that kind of thing. The ease of access to those things. it has just become easier over the decade and over the years. But I can't help but think that it'd still be a broader reader base. Now, a lot could be said about public schools, and I hesitate to go here, but public schools and teaching styles and the reading proficiency of students just taken a nosedive over the last 40 to 50 years. But I can't help but wonder even if keeping comics more accessible would have affected that. I don't think it was a good thing. In other words, I don't think it was a good thing at all in any way for comics to go, direct route only. Specialty items. Comic stores were already popping up before those days. Comic stores were already around. And as far as, the collecting, catching on and as far as people wanting bags and boards, comic shops could have done well continuing to sell comics as they were, but also selling the bags and boards and the other specialty type items, toys, that kind of thing. What I'm saying is, I don't think that comic shops it would have hurt comic shops if comics would have stayed mainstream and available in mainstream venues. Okay, that's what I'm saying. And so when Jim Shooter oversaw and had a part in the first Marvel's first direct to comic shops book, I think that's a bad thing. I think it's a bad thing. I don't think it was good for the for the medium. I don't think it was good for the hobby. I don't think it was good for the fans. I think it has curtailed a lot of readers over the decades. That's just me. All right. But a couple other things that he did. He did also other direct market books came along from Marvel, like Marvel Fanfare and Kazar and Marvel Fanfare. At the time, I was a big fan of that, and I know a lot of comic readers my age were, because Marvel Fanfare just offered from month to month. You didn't know what you were going to get, but you knew it was going to be quality. Now, it was on that what was called it's not called this anymore, I don't think, but it was called Baxter paper. All right, it was on the nice, shiny, slick Baxter paper. It was a step up from newsprint, and I have no problem with. I think it's fairly well known with those who watch me. I would love to see comics go back to newsprint. I would love it, because it would bring the price point down without really affecting creative fires, and I think the look would still be there, would still be great because of the newer type inks and that kind of thing, and the production process. But I think I'd love to see comics go back to newsprint and save the special paper, the slick paper, the nicer paper for the nicer projects, what they used to call bookshelf format and graphic novels, and save the Baxter paper, as it were, for that kind of stuff, and make the monthly floppies, put them on newsprint, and do the fans a favor and drop the price point a bit. Now, I know a lot of fans will disagree with that, especially younger fans that don't remember newsprint. And there are those fans who only collect new comics or current comics, or comics within the last 10, 20 years. But I missed the newsprint. All right, let me do this, because I said there are going to be comics as well. Picked up a few. I went to Shadow Mountain Comics in Tulsa a few weeks ago, and I just picked up just $4 book, no, $3 books, and one book that was $2.99. Had to get it because it was a Bronze Age Marvel, and it was in really good condition, even though it was a reprint book. But let me start with this: Phantom Force. Phantom Force was a book that I've never read. Now, here's the thing: no matter how long you've been reading comics, no matter how long you've been collecting, no matter how long you've been an aficionado, okay, even the ones among us who have the most knowledge and the most comics can stand to read something new every once in a while, because no one has read everything. And I like independent comics. And so This is a book that came out. It was an image book, obviously. It came out in 1993. I don't know, I don't know how long it ran. Did not buy it at the time, but it does have plots and pencils by Jack Kirby, with Michael Thibodeau and Richard French helping on the scripts, and then inks by Rob Liefeld, Todd McFarlane, Jim Lee, Mark Silvestri, Eric Larson. My goodness, the original Image crew. Scott Williams, Gary Ordway, and Danny Mickey. And so here's the opening splash there. I don't know who inked what. It's not really that important, but you can tell that Kirby did the pencils, probably loose pencils. But I'll just flip to some others in here because different inkers. Here's another spread with Kirby pencils and another inker. So, but I thought, okay, that looks fun. I'll check that out. All right. And so can't wait to read that. Now, okay, back to Shooter. One of the things that, again, mentioned that Shooter, he alienated some people. And I talked about something that John Romita Sr. even said. I'm going to have to go to it. All right. But I want to read some quotes from, first of all, Roy Thomas. Roy Thomas said really mostly favorable things about Shooter, at least this quote. But he said this. He said, when Jim Shooter took over, for better or worse, he decided to rein things in. He wanted stories told the way he wanted them told. It's not a matter of whether Jim Shooter was right or wrong. It's a matter of a different approach. He was editor-in-chief and had a right to impose what he wanted to. I thought it was kind of dumb, but I don't think Jim was dumb. I think the approach was wrong, and I don't think it really helped anything. Now, I would differ with whether or not it helped, but I like someone who can say, I don't agree with what they did, but it was within their rights as editor-in-chief to do that. That is something that's largely missing from people today. Man, these days, if I disagree with you, you're just wrong. You're bad. You might be a Nazi, I'm not getting political. I'm not going to do it. But that's there just is a intolerance these days for differing opinions in anything. I have been told in comic shops when I didn't like a book or when I liked a book, well, you're just stupid. Okay, that's stupid. Why would you not read this or that? Why would you read this or that? It's amazing to me how some people, not all, but some people today are just simply incapable of accepting a different opinion. And so I like to hear Roy Thomas, or like to read Roy Thomas say, look, Jim was editor-in-chief. If he wanted to rein things in and management didn't disagree, well, that was his prerogative. Yeah, I didn't agree with it. And a lot of the creative folks didn't agree with it. But unspoken, he didn't say this, but I'm saying this. Marvel was still doing some things really, really well. And, Marvel was making money. And fans were happy. Fans were happy with X-Men. Fans were happy with Avengers and Amazing Spider-Man and Fantastic Four and Daredevil. And so, you're going to upset some creative folk. But as long as the company stays in the black and fans keep coming back for more, those complaints can be issued, but, probably not much going to come of them. But just being able to disagree, but say he was editor-in-chief, not me, and not go on a personal attack. Okay. He said, I don't think it was smart. I'm not saying Jim Shooter isn't smart, but what he did wasn't smart. Okay. And so I like that. I like that very much. I like that ability to disagree, but not destroy. Okay. Now, John Romita, let's get to what John Romita Sr. said. He said Shooter had been great for the first 2 or 3 years. He got the creative people treated with more respect. There's a positive. Got us sent to conventions first class with our ways paid, and we thought the world of him. Okay, so there's John Romita Sr. Okay, just for those out there who don't think much of Shooter, he was not considered a total villain by everybody. All right. He wasn't all negative. It wasn't all negative. All right. There's John Romita Sr. saying that at some point they thought the world of him. Then, and I found this interesting, then his Secret Wars was a big hit. And after that, he decided he knew everything and he started changing everybody's stuff. Okay. Now, personally, being a human being, as is everyone who is watching now and who will see this later, we all are. I can understand, I can see all of us being susceptible to the possibility of once we do something great and people start praising what we're doing, our hat size may change. It may be that we need a larger hat because lo and behold, as people have praised us, our head, okay, has gotten a little bit bigger. That's just human nature. And we have to, I think we have to struggle to rein that in, every one of us. Okay. Some may do it more easily than others, but that's just me. Okay. I know I have to do that. As a pastor who preaches every Sunday morning, when I hear people say, Pastor, that was such a wonderful sermon. That was so good. And I was blessed by that. And that was so encouraging. Thank you. Immediately I go into the inner voice in me. Call it what you want. I call it the Holy Spirit, but the inner voice in me says, good job, but just remember, you're not all that. All right. You're not all that. Don't get a big head. All of us, no matter what field we're in, we have we can have a tendency, if we're not careful, to get big headed. All right. When we do something something good. So I actually liked what Romita said, or what John Romita said, and I could see it being true. All right, so here's a quote from John Byrne as well. John Byrne, he said, Shooter came along just when Marvel needed him. Just when Marvel needed him, but he stayed too long. Now, I've seen situations like that too in different areas of in different fields, different workplaces. Having fixed just about everything that was wrong, he could not stop fixing. And around the time I left to do Superman, I said that I thought Shooter and Dick Giordano should trade jobs. It was DC that needed fixing then, and do so about every 5 years or so. Now there's an interesting idea. According to John Byrne, Jim Shooter and Dick Giordano should have, about the time that John Byrne got on Superman, started doing Superman, should have traded places. Okay. And that should go on about every 5 years. Shooter had fixed the problems, according to Byrne, at Marvel, and evidently, DC needed to be reined in the way Marvel did a few years before. And it was his, maybe it would have been a great deal to have a swap and have Giordano go to Marvel and be a little more relaxed, okay? And because that's the implication, and have Jim Shooter kind of reel things in a little bit at DC and get them to a more tighter, more better deadlines being met and that kind of thing. So maybe that would have been a great idea for the two. It's certainly a novel idea. Every 5 years or so, swap editors in chief. Okay. Just let Marvel and DC do that for a while. So I liked that. Okay. And so Byrne goes on to say, Shooter had put Marvel into a place where all that was needed was a kindly father figure at the helm. And that was not Shooter. Secret Wars was when the trouble really kicked into high gear. There's two creators agreeing that Secret Wars, after Secret Wars, was the problem. Post Secret Wars, he said, we must never forget that Secret Wars began as a toy promotion. Shooter turned into. We must never forget that Secret Wars began as a toy promotion. Shooter turned it into a way to reshape the Marvel universe in his image. Now, I think Byrne may have been taking a little bit of flair with that, accusing Shooter of trying to create Marvel in his image. Maybe not, but I did not know until I was preparing for this live stream. I didn't know that first came the toys and then came the series. I didn't know that. So kudos to you who knew that. I guess I wasn't paying attention at the time. I just know I enjoyed Marvel Superhero Secret Wars. Now it was no creative diamond, it wasn't one of the most creative things, but it was just a fun, all the Marvel heroes versus all the Marvel villains. let's get it on. Okay. Let's get ready to rumble. You could have imagined that being said out loud before Marvel Superhero Secret Wars got started. Let's get ready to rumble. And it's on. Okay. Because you got to see heroes versus villains that had never faced each other before. And it was fun for the fans. It really was. All right. And I enjoyed it. I've never heard anybody say that Marvel Superhero Secret Wars just completely stunk. Okay. Most people liked it on some level. People still try to collect it, and people still try to get it together. And of course, it's known for where the black suit came from, Spider-Man's black suit, the symbiote, Venom, all of that stuff. But it was fun. It was a lot of fun, and that came over under Shooter's time as editor-in-chief at Marvel. And so, I've got great memories from the things that were produced by Marvel while he was the editor-in-chief. And here's where I will always come down. You cannot, I don't think, in any comic book company or any publishing company, you can't just say that an editor-in-chief had absolutely nothing to do with any of the success of a company. You can't say that. Okay. So even if you're even if a fan or a podcaster or a YouTube content creator or someone, if you're gonna make a point of just lambasting and Jim Shooter and making him your whipping boy over and over and over, you're being unrealistic. Even the creators say, no, Jim did some good things. Okay. He just went too far, or he got too heavy-handed, or that, and that can happen. But not going to take anything away from Shooter, because his work at Marvel, it impacted my early readership very, very much. My love of comics very much. Okay, another comic here. I talked about picking up a few indies just because every once in a while we're got to read something new, different, something you've never read before. This was another dollar comic by Mike Baron, Val Mayrick, and James Sherman. I do not know who James Sherman is, but I do know who Mike Baron is, obviously, and Val Mayrick. Remember Mike Baron primarily for his work on Nexus, his longtime work on Nexus, and his work on The Flash early on in 1986, after, post-Crisis of Infinite Earths, when Wally first took the mantle of the Flash, and he and Butch Geiss's work was great on those few issues they did. But this is and Val Mayrick, of course, I liked his Bronze Age horror work for Marvel. But this is Kato 2, part 1 of 2. Okay, so it's just something. Again, it's not Kato 1, it's Kato 2. But at least it is a first issue, first part of a story. Love that cover, done by Val Mayrick. Val Mayrick has a very realistic style. His paints are fantastic, as you can see there. But now Val Mayrick also has his style differs from time to time. His style certainly has changed from his days at Marvel. But here's the interior. It's not bad, just different. I mean, you see that painted cover, and especially longtime comics fans know that the painted cover is not, the interior art's not going to be the same, but still that great Val Mayrick art, very bright. Okay, and this was published. So I probably should have said that. This was published in, oh my goodness, save my eyes, looks like 1992. All right, so yep, 1990. Good grief. I'm going to say 1992. Anyway, great art inside, very bright. It's not newsprint per se, but it's like the higher quality newsprint stuff. So anyway, good stuff by Val Mayrick in Kato 2, issue 1. And so that was another, again, check out different stuff, especially when you can get them out of the dollar box or the 50-cent box. Just pick up a few things that you've never read before. Expand your knowledge of the hobby and the medium. Okay, so we talked about Jim Shooter, Marvel, and that was going to be obviously the longer part of the, talking about Jim Shooter. But I do want to talk about Valiant, because Valiant, first of all, and again, in preparing for this, I was taken aback because I remember the start of Image. Everybody who was into comics in the 90s remembers the start of Image. Image came along, and the story of how Image started, especially told by Todd McFarlane, is just a lot of fun to listen to. There may be some creative license there, I don't know, but I love the story of Todd McFarlane. And told by Rob Liefeld is even more fun in a way. We don't get when our comics sell a bunch of copies and we break records, we don't get a watch, we don't get this, we don't get that. And that kind of thing is hilarious to me. I love the history of and the story of the formation of Image Comics when all those young artists, those young hot artists, and we can argue about, whether they deserve that or not. But the fact of the matter is they were driving sales. And when they left Marvel, walked past the DC office, even made a point, as the story goes, to go into DC and saying, we left Marvel, we're not coming here. Of course, the DC editors are getting very excited when they see these guys walking in. No, we're not coming here. We're just letting you know we're going to start our own comic book company. And, we're going to take you big two to task. Okay. So I remember Image Comics, and the story about Image Comics is great. And they started in 1992. It was when it was founded, I believe. But here's the thing about Valiant. Now, Valiant also was figured largely in the early 90s, but Valiant was actually established or founded in 1989. I did not remember that. And I don't have a date for when the first Valiant comic came out. All I know about Valiant is I liked XO Man of War. And for the first year or so, at least, I read XO. I liked XO. It was a fun book. I read some Dr. Solar. Was it Solar Man of the Atom? Okay. Solar Man of the Atom. I read some of that because Solar was set in two reasons. I liked Barry Windsor Smith's art, but also Solar was set in Muskogee, Oklahoma, which was just next door to where I was going to college at the time in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. And so I thought that was kind of neat, that the story, the characters, everything were set right there in Muskogee, my backyard at the time. And so that was fun. But XO Man of War is what took it for me. I never got into Harbinger. I never got into Ninjak. Yes, that's true. Comics fan, thanks for speaking on that. Ninjak was great. The Quesada covers, and I don't know if he did interiors or not, but I always admired those covers of Ninjak. And that was, of course, the second iteration, I think, of Valiant, if I'm not mistaken, when they were bought out by Acclaim. But they, you had the first wave. You had the only one that wasn't an original character was Magnus Robot Hunter. But you had, Solar. I'm sorry. Solar was not original. But they did really cool things with these. But XO Man of War, I think, was original. Harbinger was original. Rye and Bloodshot, of course. But yeah, what I remember about Valiant, though, was it was kind of, no pun intended, because we're going to get to this in a moment, but kind of Jim Shooter being defiant and say, I'm going to go out there and show Marvel how comics are done. And Valiant comics, the early ones there was a Valiant style. They looked, even though you could tell the different artists' styles, but there was a look to Valiant comics. And it was a very clean, crisp look for the most part. But, what I remember about Valiant comics was how the first issue, and I think issue 0 of Harbinger, the back issue sales were just insane. You couldn't get, there was a time there. I remember at the time first time I thought, well, maybe I'll get an issue of, try to score an issue number 1 of Harbinger, read that series. I was actually at the time for a short time living in Hawaii, and I went to Gecko's Comics in Hawaii, and they had an issue of Harbinger number 1. I thought, well, I'll check this to see if I can afford this. Well, it was $100, and the comic was just a year or two old at the time. So that was crazy. And I remember thinking, that's insane even then. I don't know what you can get at Harbinger number 1 for right now. I wouldn't care if I had one or not. But I'm sure it's gone down some, but maybe not. Who knows? But that's what I remember about Valiant. The Muskogee, Oklahoma, Exo Man of War was really good, and the impossibility of getting an issue of Harbinger #1 within 6 months after it came out. So that's what I remember about Valiant. But then there was Defiant, and Defiant doesn't even figure on my. It only figures in comics history. My thoughts on comics history. It doesn't figure in my fan base at all, or my fan memory at all, because the one book that I tried, and the only book I remember of Defiant, was Plasm. Plasm was weird, man. And I think it was it David Latham that did the art for Plasm? Anybody out there remember? I don't remember, but Plasm was just odd. It was on a totally different planet that was plasma base, I guess, and green goop everywhere. That's what I remember. That I think they even formed weapons from, and all of that. It was just weird, and it didn't hold my attention. And there was an issue of that. There's still to this day an issue of that, an issue number 0 that was not. There was one that was stitched into or fastened into the spine of a previews catalog, I believe, or advance. But this one was actually, it was self-standing. It wasn't you didn't have to tear it out of a catalog. And I think it was sold at some con or something. But there's a issue 0 that's still by some sought out. Plasm I just never could warm up to it. And I tried the first 3 or 4 issues and I was done. Now today, if I'm not hooked by the first issue of a series, I drop it. There's just at $4 to $5, an issue. I can't do much better. I can't, I'm not going to spend $8 to $10 to find out if I like something. So anyway, that's that. But anyway, so that was Defiant for me. And then there was Broadway. Anyone out there remember Broadway comics? Broadway didn't. I think it lasted a shorter period than any of them. And I remember one title. I think I remember Fatale, and it was I don't know if it's Good Girl or Bad Girl, but the main protagonist was a woman, and I had 1 or 2 friends who liked it as it was coming out, but otherwise I don't remember any other comics from Broadway. But now after that, Shooter, he worked a little bit for Dark Horse. He came back and worked a little bit for Marvel at some point in time, and he did different things, and he stayed in comics. He kept his hand in comics to some extent or another, I think right up until the last few years of his life. But it just kind of, all of that having been said, he figured largely in comics and figured largely in my life as a young comics fan. And, it's tough. It's a hit, as a guy who did a lot and put his mark on the business for better or worse. I think very, very, very primarily for better. But it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that he is gone. All right. Another comic I'll show you here. This one is Chuck Dixon and Alex Nino, who I love Alex Nino's work. The cover is fantastic. Great. Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I should say it's Demon Blade. All right. Cover's fantastic. Nice white cover with, some bloodletting going on there. But Chuck Dixon he writes like a man. Okay. And by that, I mean, I'm not besmirching any other male writers out there, but he writes, stories that guys would like to read. Okay. And this was published in 1989. It is a copyright Chuck Dixon, even though it's New Comics Group. But anyway, here's some interior stuff by Alex Nino. Very, very, very bold, thick lines. I love black and white work. Okay. I like black and white comic work, but and this is nice to look at. It's not hard to look at. It is kind of like I say, you almost feel like with the black border, especially the black border kind of doesn't help, but you do feel like you're immersed in the black when you first get into this comic. But this one, I love the art because I love Nino's work, and I can't wait to get into it because this one I suspect I will follow up and try to find the rest of these. Don't know how long it ran because I'd never heard of it till I flipped through it in the box and picked it up. All right, last one here. Marvel Adventure featuring Daredevil. Marvel Adventure number 5. I should mention this was reprint. This is a reprint from 1976, and I don't know the original. Looks like it's a reprint of Daredevil number 26 with Stan Lee story, Gene Colan art, and it is a Stiltman story. Okay, but there it is, and I picked this up for $2.99 just because it was in such immaculate shape. And very, very glossy, very, still very, pretty sharp corners and everything. And so whenever I find comics like that, it's hard for me to, Bronze Age and on back, it's hard for me to turn them down. It's hard for me to not pick them up for just a few bucks. And so I'll enjoy reading that as well. But anyway, that's it. Just wanted to talk about, I've been wanting to do this for ever since I heard of his passing. I think it was last day of June that he passed away, June 29th or 30th in there somewhere. But Jim Shooter, a giant in the comics industry, in my opinion. But anyway, that's it. Hey, I want to thank you guys who have chimed in and been watching. And for those who watch after the fact, thank you for that as well. Thank you for your likes. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't. But otherwise, just thanks for watching 4 Color Commentary, and I'll see you next time.